So here we're going to talk about some of the main arguments against what I've just described. So what a lot of people will say is that Muslims enjoy religious freedom in secular countries. Such a great situation that Muslims have in the West, in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, in Germany, France, South Africa. Muslims are just having a great time with religious freedom. We can have our mosque, we can have our Islamic schools. This is a great setup, and we much prefer to live under this secular system than this, idea of a khilafah or this idea of an Islamic state ruled by Sharia. That doesn't seem very appealing. We might benefit as Muslims with such a system, but then what about religious minorities? It's not fair that we get to enjoy the benefits of living under secular countries, but non-Muslims would not be able to live according to the full extent of their religious beliefs in an Islamic state. So that has to do with the concept of reciprocity, which is important. We have to have, concern for non-Muslims and the golden rule, which we talked about. So this is why separation of church and state is better, and Muslims are really enjoying religious freedom and benefiting from it. So what do we say to this? This is a meme that I find amusing. Oh, really? So let's break down this kind of argument. Again, we have all of the previous module where we talked about how incoherent the idea of separation of church and state really is, and we analyzed that. But let's ask, are we really enjoying religious freedom in these secular countries? Reflect on the fact that the Sharia and everything that Islam prescribes comes in this holistic package. You have guidance for every level of society. And this is the analysis that we talked about in Upside Down and other courses. But you have prescriptions from Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam on that guide the individual level, the family context, the communal context, the societal context, and the ummah or the civilization as a whole. Allah's guidance comes in the form of commandments and restrictions and prohibitions that touch on every level of the human experience and human existence. So does the secular state, any secular state, respect and accommodate all of these separate levels of Islamic law? I mean, just think about it. When it comes to the most basic things, even on the, at a certain point within colonial history, family law, Muslim family law was respected in the sense that the colonizer said that, look, however you want to conduct your marriages, however you want to conduct divorces, inheritance, child custody, those kinds of family disputes, you can use Islamic law. But when it comes to running the cities, the communities, when it comes to managing the affairs of people in the marketplace, when it comes to any kind of economic consideration, when it comes to intra-community disputes, when it comes to social policy at a high level, when it comes to overall governance and the issuing of laws, when it comes to military policy, foreign policy, all of those things we, the secular colonizer, control. But you can have your little family circle and your individual circle in terms of what you personally believe and what you think is true and how you conduct yourself as an individual. Yeah, as long as you obey the law, you can believe whatever you want to believe, and the family law will leave to Islam as well. That changed, okay, because then family law in many of these Muslim countries increasingly over the past 3 decades have been updated and changed, brought into line with modernist understandings of family and gender. So those things are also now no longer up to Islam and what the Sharia says. No, those also are dictated by the state. And even on the individual level, what you can believe is dictated by the state, right? On the family level, they've liquidated pretty much all any kind of gender role distinction between men and women. In countries like Tunisia, inheritance now is equal, whereas rather than going according to what the Sharia prescribes, women and men can opt into a secular mode of inheritance. Okay? There's no more restriction according to Islamic law. When it comes to the individual level, what you can believe, what you can learn. Okay? What do you believe about jihad? What do you believe about the acceptability of other religions? What do you believe about salvation for non-Muslims? The government is now intervening in many countries. Secular government is editing the Quran. Literally, they're taking out ayat or selectively translating ayat. They're editing hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. They're reducing the accessibility of certain books. They're only allowing certain kinds of preachers to teach at the main universities or to be broadcast on the religious TV stations. So that is how they're manipulating what is acceptable for what it is that a Muslim can believe. And if you start promoting these non-PC beliefs publicly or even privately in your home, you could be reported to the secret police. You could be reported to authorities who will then imprison you. So you better be careful what you say about Islam and about these sensitive topics that will conflict with the interests of the secular state. So on all of these levels, and this is not just the Muslim world, in the United States, same exact thing. Be very careful what you profess to believe on the individual level, what you teach to your kids. In some secular countries, Muslims aren't even allowed to teach their kids because homeschooling has been prohibited. In Germany, for example, recently, no more homeschooling. You don't decide what you teach your children. No. We, the state, determine what is best for your child to learn. We don't want you indoctrinating your children with false beliefs. We will teach your children. Then when they reach a certain age, they can choose for themselves in terms of what religion to follow, but we have to make sure it's an informed choice. So you send your kids to secular education, grade school, for 12 years at least, and that is perfectly in line with freedom and liberty and equality and religious freedom. You are living as a religious minority, perfectly free, but we educate your children. You don't have that right. So do you see what is happening here? Okay? Do you see what's happening? Enjoy your freedom. You're put in a glass box, a glass cage. Practice religion as much as you want. As much as you can enjoy of your religion, practice it, but only in this space that we give you, that we define for you. Okay? Enjoy all the religious freedom you want. Asterisks. Just don't read the fine print. And the fine print is that the state, the secular state, defines what religion is. And at any time, the state can change its definition. So if tomorrow the state decides that this box is a little too big, your practice of religion within this box threatens others or goes against the interests of others or the state, then we might have to reduce the size of this box for your own good, for your own safety, and for the betterment of all of society. This is perfectly conformant with religious freedom. All we do is we implement laws that will restrict your behavior and your beliefs to bring it in line with the interests of the state. But don't worry, you have religious freedom. So this is the ever shrinking cage of religious freedom. And again, you can see it. I mean, this has always been the case. It's always been a shrinking cage. And I gave you the example of colonial policies and how things were restricted to just family law. You can't practice the entirety of the Sharia. You can't practice the entirety of Islam within even these Muslim countries, because they're ruled by these secular powers. But and then in the West, obviously, so much of Islam cannot be really practiced by Muslims. Okay, but then now in recent years, the noose is tightening, the cage is shrinking. LGBT, as I mentioned earlier, can you oppose your child getting a sex change surgery? Seems like in many places, no, you can't. If little Bilal wears makeup one day and he tells the school psychiatrist that he likes dolls, playing with dolls, then the psychiatrist from the state might decide that little Bilal is actually little Bilala, and will prescribe a strong dose or a very aggressive regimen of hormone therapy. And you as a parent, you can't say no to that. That would be bigoted. That would be abusive. Same with how you conduct your business, your schools, your mosques. Maybe your mosque needs to start officiating gay marriages, and if you refuse, then your mosque will lose state funding. Your mosque won't get that kind of exempt tax status that other gay-friendly, rainbow-friendly institutions enjoy. That's perfectly legitimate and perfectly in line with religious freedom. Or your business baking cakes for gay weddings. If you don't comply and you don't bake that cake, well, we're going to audit you. We're going to allow others to sue you, and you'll have to pay all kinds of legal fees to defend yourself against these lawsuits. And we're not going to protect you from that kind of legal warfare. And on and on and on. You can't homeschool your children. We're going to educate your children on LGBT from kindergarten. They have to know that all of these lifestyles are beautiful and accepted. Doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what your religion says. On and on. Halal meat in some of these European countries, they have determined that slaughter according to Islamic religious ritual, also Jewish religious ritual, is actually inhumane. Therefore, we have to prohibit it. So you can't have halal meat or kosher meat in some of these countries. So that's not restricting your religious liberty. You know, you have plenty of religious liberty in this cage. You can always become a vegetarian or vegan. Marriage, more generally, obviously prohibiting polygamy in most of these secular countries. A man can't have multiple legal wives. That's one example, but anything that's related to marriage. When it comes to divorce, no-fault divorce contradicts religious law. Definitely Islam, but even Christianity and Judaism, Orthodox Judaism. No-fault divorce is a big problem according to all these religions, but it doesn't matter what you believe. We are giving your wife the access or the option of no-fault divorce. You can't impose, or you can't have a requirement for following a religious marriage process or religious divorce proceedings. She can always opt out. So your religion is functionally inert and inapplicable in those contexts. Anything having to do with gender roles, completely liquidated. Okay, so even within the privacy of your own home, the secular state is judge, jury, and executioner. They're the ultimate authority, even in your own home, even in your own bedroom. Children's education, what your child learns, and we already mentioned LGBT, but even things like evolution, any other kind of thing that might conflict with your religious beliefs, it doesn't matter. The state decides what is the correct curriculum. And in many of these countries, they have either prohibited homeschooling or they're thinking about it. In Harvard, they've had conferences recently where these liberal secularists are contemplating how can we ban homeschooling for the United States, because this is dangerous. Homeschooling is a danger to society. We, the Harvard minds, know best what for your children, what your children should learn and be educated on. Even your private thoughts and beliefs, they are dictated by the secular state. Again, this has to do with what I mentioned earlier about your sources of knowledge, what can be taught in the mosque or the church, what can be taught in universities, in the school system. So this will dictate your beliefs and your thoughts. Also, mass surveillance, mass control of social media, what views can be expressed on social media. It's not, the free space of free market that it pretends to be. No, certain views cannot be shared on social media. You'll be banned. And anyone who expresses those will be heavily censored. So that means the state determines what you actually can think and believe. And if you have some of these dangerous ideas that the state finds out about through mass surveillance, through looking at your internet search history, through mass data mining all your communications, which is something that's a proven fact that these intelligence agencies like the NSA and FBI and others actually do in the US context, but also throughout the world. If they find you expressing an idea that is considered dangerous or has the potential to incite harm, okay, and we already saw in the previous module how loose of a term harm can be, how plastic of a term harm can be. They determine that you are expressing these ideas, then they can imprison you, they can hold you indefinitely, they can freeze your bank accounts, they can destroy your entire life, seize your property. This is the freedom that we're enjoying in the secular state. So one last argument that secularists might make, this is an argument: religion is the cause of conflict and public dispute and violence between groups. We have a long history, especially in Europe, of different religious sects that fight each other and they kill each other. So to prevent this kind of conflict, this bloodshed, we have to separate religion from governance. This is very crucial for peace, for the interests of peace and love and the stability of society. So how do we respond to this? I mean, this is much easier to respond to. We just say that all forms of identity have the potential to cause conflict and wars. Okay, and if we want to separate those identities from governance, then we can do that. So there's ethnic conflict, right? In fact, ethnic and racial conflict are the biggest sources of conflict when we look at world history, that people killing each other on the basis of racial difference. So then we should make sure that race is something separate from governance. Ethnic identity is separate from governance. Okay? So a Muslim, suppose one were to say that Muslims were the most peaceful people because we've never fought in an ethnic war, right? Muslim identity is not ethnically based, and within the early Muslim empires, such as the Khulafa al-Rashidun, the four rightly guided Khulafa caliphs, they were a multi-ethnic, multiracial army that was conquering all of this territory for Islam in the early history of Islam. It wasn't on the basis of race, like an Arab race, There were more than just Arabs who were the early Muslims who spread Islam in the territories of Islam. So that means Muslims are very peaceful, right? By this definition. Okay, so this secular argument is only looking at religious conflict, and it's ignoring all the conflict that comes from ethnicity, all the conflict that comes from racial identity. Those are things that we have to celebrate. We have to celebrate racial identity, and if you are a specific racial minority, you bring your concerns and your identity to represent who you are into Congress, into the law. Maybe you'll be the first president of your racial identity, and you can represent the concerns of your ethnicity. This is the kind of diversity that we have to celebrate. We don't separate race, we don't separate ethnicity from governance. And sometimes you can have an entire country that's ruled by one race. You have the Chinese state, you have the Jewish Israeli state. There's no problem with a specific race ruling a country. See, this goes contrary to exactly their logic used against Muslims and religious governance. So, this is an argument ad absurdum. Okay? We can argue that, okay, fine, you want to separate these identities, like a religious identity, because it's a source of conflict. Fine, we can separate the ethnic identities, just like the secular state is liquidating religion or putting religion in a very severely controlled box. We can put race and ethnicity in a very highly controlled box. We can eliminate racial and ethnic identity, and this will end conflict. We can eliminate racial identity through forced interracial marriage. This is actually the policy of the Han Chinese against the Uyghurs. They're forcing Uyghurs to marry Han so that it will dilute the Uyghur ethnicity. Okay? We can, have open borders to just cause as much mixing of the races as possible. So this is a type of argument that you can make if you identify racial and ethnic identity as a source of conflict. But most people would oppose those kinds of policies, and like forced interracial marriage. Most people would not agree with that. Muslims certainly don't agree with something like that. So then if that doesn't make sense for race and ethnicity, then why would it make sense for religion? This is argument ad absurdum.